This week's parsha is a double portion. And as we go through the double portion, you wonder, how are all of these parshots connected? I mean, what's the connection between them all? We start off at the beginning of this week's portion and talks about a vow or an neder, right? What a person does when they give a vow, what does the vow consist of, how can a vow be revoked, who can revoke a vow, under what circumstances. And then we go from a vow to the battle against the Midianites. You have the soldiers going into battle. There they don't kill any of the women, and Moses is pretty upset. And the reason why we find out he's upset is they actually recognize some of the women as the ones who were the beautiful women that helped to lure some of the Zimri's family into adultery and idolatry. He's incensed, but there seems to be an atonement for it, right? And the atonement is the proper disposition of the wartime wealth that was gathered in, and also the vessels that were brought in to be properly cleaned. So it was some level of atonement. But at the same time, it was the desire of the leadership in the military to do something that was not necessarily expedient. One of the things that the way I'd like to title this is the consequences of desire and free choice. The consequence of desire and free choice. I believe that each one of us, as we've proceeded in our spiritual journey, we have gotten to the place that we're at because we realize that there are consequences to our desire and free choice. There's nothing wrong with desire. There's nothing wrong with free choice. It's just that we have to mesh that together to match what the Torah says. What does Hashem say about my desire and my free choice? Very important. On the face of this whole text, we come up next to the Reubenites and the Gadites, who from their desire decide not to cross over but to stay in the Transjordan region. And that, I would like to examine that text specifically so that we can sort of wrap it all together and talk about how our desire and our free choice can be mitigated and properly balanced in our life. On the face of it, the request of the Gadites and the Reubenites to settle in the east of the Jordan appears to be quite decent and worthy. They want to raise their cattle in a good place that causes great prosperity. But Moses raises two arguments with them. How can you not participate in the battle for the western bank of the Jordan River? How are you going to participate when you're on the wrong side of the river? Next, you might cause the rest of the tribes to prefer not to cross in the promised land. Something big was on the mind of Moshe, and they had to figure out what was going on. So they proposed to cross over as basic shock troops, and Moses accepted their proposal. What they did appears to have been worthy, the idea that they proposed. However, one should follow the approach that Rabbi Avigdor Nebenzahl, who held that it was worthy, what that they proposed was worthy. The true reason that Moshe was uncomfortable with this was the idea of the spiritual effect of their decision. Once again, free choice, great gift. Once again, desire, nothing wrong with it. But what is going to be the spiritual outcome of that? Being the issue here with the Gadites and Reubenites making this decision was not so much about the locale, the location, or the geography, but the fact that it was going to affect them spiritually. How would it affect them spiritually? Because they were further away from Shiloh. They were further away from the mainstay of the leadership. You got to remember, each one of the heads of the tribes were part of the Sanhedrin, and they were the spiritual leaders. And the issue was, is if you stay on this side of the Transjordan, then who's going to help your brothers fight? This is a family issue. Number two, what's going to happen to you spiritually because you stayed on this side? I would like to present further argument on the support of Rabbi Nebenzahl's position, and we could ask these two questions. If dwelling in Transjordan is a worthy thing, why did Moses not go along with it immediately? And why was Moses not told from the outset to settle several tribes there? The whole idea, God never said they should settle tribes there. And we're going to see the language point out to something different. Moses' criticism is very cutting. If we look at the text, he says, he could have made do with verses 6 through 7. It says, are your brothers to go to war while you stay here? He could have simply said that. That would have been enough. He continues on, why will you turn the minds of the Israelites? But instead he went on to another 8 verses from verse 8 to 16, and in a very rebuking tone, he says, thereupon the Lord was incensed at Israel, a breed of sinful men, to add still further the Lord's wrath. And if you turn away from him, you are bringing calamity. Moshe was not playing around. He was very serious about this. Now we understand why Moses did not suggest solutions in his view. Their idea was not a good one. Although the arguments that he raised explicitly concerned their own participation in the war and that impact they will have on the other tribes, these are not the main issues. The main problem is that they would turn away from the Lord. That is what he was concerned about. Sure, you go to battle, but what happens when you settle back into a land that is not yours? Apparently, when it comes to spiritual affairs, certain things have to be concealed in order to allow free choice. Free choice is a very important gift from the Creator. Notice I don't use the word free will. A lot of people, and I know we hear it within the Orthodox community, they use the term free will, but in reality we're talking about free choice. None of us have free will. You can't will yourself to fly to the moon, okay? I can have a free choice to pay several $1 million and go into space maybe, if I had the money, but I don't have free will. Apparently on the onset, settling on the east bank of the Jordan River was not the Lord's intention. Now I want you to know, here, listen to the words. It says in Deuteronomy 11:31, for you are about to cross the Jordan to enter and possess the land, quote unquote, occupy it and settle it. This emphasis appears to be on the possessing and the settling of what? The promised land, not the Transjordan. In particular, not the eastern bank of the Jordan. Now we find in a writing called Or Hayim on Numbers 10:29, it says this, the Lord promises to our forefathers were to give us none other than the land of Canaan and not the land of Shion and Og. Shion and Og was on the other side of the Jordan. Moreover, it is even said in Sifri, save the land of Shion and Og, which you took of your own accord. Nevertheless, the Lord consented and gave it to them. This idea helps to explain another precise use of the language, which we're going to point out. In verse 2 through 4, the Reubenites and Gadites come to Moses and present the fact, but do not state their request. This is what they say. The Gadites and the Reubenites came to Moshe and said, Atroth and Dibon is cattle country. It's like West Texas, right? It was cattle country. We can raise kosher beef, grain-fed, free range, I don't know what else you want to call them, grass-fed, free range. Be the best cattle out there. That's a good argument, right? Who wouldn't want good meat? This brings us to the end of the paragraph. He says, verse 5 reads, and they said it would be a favor to us if this land were given to your servants as a holding. Now, notice the text that we're getting ready to examine. God says, go possess. They say, given to us. There's going to be a difference in language. The text presents a difficulty insofar as verse 5 is a direct continuation of their words. So why should verse 4 close a paragraph and verse 5 begin with another, and they said? In line with this idea presented above, we suggest that they sensed their request was not worthy and therefore presented data, and when it was silent, and thus concluding their words, they hoped Moshe would propose the idea, like they were sort of suggesting maybe he'll come up with the idea and we won't have to state it. You've heard that, right? Have your children ever done that to you? They give you an idea and they think that maybe you're going to come up and go, hey, why don't we do X, Y, Z? And they go, yeah, it's a brilliant idea, Mom and Dad. That's what they were hoping. They hoped Moses himself would propose the idea, and then it would be clear that their behavior was proper. When Moses failed to respond, though, they themselves were forced to raise the idea. Therefore, Scripture repeats, and it says, and they said. Moses had understood the drift of the words. He understood exactly what they were saying, but deliberately maintained silence to intimidate them. He didn't want them to do this. Why did he not want them to do it? Is it because he didn't want nice cattle raising country for them? No, it wasn't. He was concerned that they would stay and be separated from their brethren. They, however, did not catch the hint, and they also preferred to ignore Moshe. Even further on, after Moshe sort of indicated what he did, they did not feel that Moses had ruled out their idea completely. Well, he didn't actually say no. Right? We've heard this before. You know, your children ask you something when you go back and you say, well, why did you do this? And they say, well, you didn't say I couldn't do it. Right? When Moses perceived that they didn't understand his hints, he did not put them off explicitly. Rather, he accepted the proposal in line with the principle that people should be led in the direction they should go. Interesting. You see, the people were getting to a place of spiritual maturity, and they need to be responsible and be able to make their decisions. This is interesting because before they had been chided in the desert for trying to make decisions outside of the framework. And here, sort of given a choice. This also indicated by the careful choice of words and the next parashat that we're associating this double portion, Numbers 34, 13 through 15, it says this. Notice the wording. This is the land you are to receive by lot as your hereditary portion, which the Lord has commanded to be given to the 9.5 tribes, for the Reubenite tribe and the Gadite tribe. This is abbreviated stuff. And the half tribe of Manasseh, notice the word's difference, have taken their portion. Those 2.5 tribes have taken their portions across Jordan on the east side and the eastward side. We see the difference between the 9.5 tribes they receive. You see? And Reuben and Gad take. I think Miss Sandy and I were talking right before class that about the idea of prayer, seeking Hashem, telling him what you want, what your desires. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's very noble. But in reality, I would rather be receiving what Hashem wants me to have rather than trying to take what I want. Why? Because free choice and desire, there can be consequences that are not pleasant. There's sometimes that we can take things that are granted to us because God gives us free choice. And in that free choice, there could be very negative consequences. It says that the tribes have taken their portion. What does Kabbalah mean?
Receive.
Receive. It's receiving a download. We see the difference between 9.5 tribes and 2 tribes. The 9.5 tribes are to receive a heritage, a portion that the Lord has commanded to give. In other words, the Lord commanded that they be given, and thus they receive a portion. But regarding the 2.5 tribes, 3 times the text uses the verb to take. They have taken their portion, and again, have taken their portions, in order to stress that they did not receive this inheritance, but rather that they took it. Here too, it seems Moses was trying to hint to them that their actions had not been proper. Now, the book of Joshua points something out that's interesting. In chapter 22, it mentions that the Reubenites and Gadites and half tribe of Manasseh returned to the east side of the Jordan. This was after the battle. and built an altar next to the river. Do you remember this story? They built this altar, and in verse 12 of chapter 22 of the book of Joshua, it says, when the Israelites heard this, the whole community of Israelites assembled at Shiloh, and they were ready to go to war and to destroy Reuben and Gad. What in the world was happening? What do you think was happening? They already had perceived that they're getting ready to build an altar in a place that God didn't appoint an altar. Already in that very short period of time was starting, they felt to separate themselves from the tribe and possibly go into sin. Now, obviously, that was turned around when Pinchas got involved, and they started having a discussion, and they found out in reality, no, they were just being thankful to God for the bounty that He had given them. The conclusion's this: that we have the ability to desire, and we have free choice, and especially this message goes out to the B'nai Noach in the world community. We have all of the Torah that we can express and live in. But don't take something that has not been given. Be careful and cautious about what you take upon yourself as a neder, a vow. Consult with a rabbi to find out what you should and shouldn't do and how you should do it. I just heard a discussion on Facebook today. I didn't have a chance to respond. But a person was saying what happens, I remember in the previous life, we were told that a woman had to obey her husband. You know what previous life we're talking about. And she says, well, what happens when my husband doesn't like the fact that I wear a head covering, and how, am I supposed to obey God or my husband? And the response was given by Rabbi Kaufman, who said, God doesn't require you to wear a head covering. So that answers that. Don't take something on yourself that God doesn't require. Even though you have full permission to do those things, make sure that it's all measured out. Look and examine the consequences of your desire and the consequence of your free choice. Because in doing this, what we discover is that all of our free choice, all the things that we do, we must consider spiritual authority in our life. And the spiritual authority in our life comes from, number one, the Torah, the Tanakh. Number two, from the rabbis who give us consultation. And if we do those two things, we'll always be able to walk with wisdom in Hashem, and we'll also be able to make wise decisions in our life that produce fruitful result. That concludes the shiur, and we will go into our question and answer period right away, and any other things that you guys would like to discuss in the text.